Hey, welcome to Mooney Reads. My name is Beck, and today I'm going to be doing the Omnivore Book Tag. This tag was created by A Cup of Books, and I will be linking their original video in the comments below. With this tag, you are challenged to pick 4 different book genres that you read from, and then answer these 3 questions about each genre. So, the 4 genres that I will be talking about today are graphic novels and manga, memoir, contemporary YA, and social sciences, kind of more academic-oriented sociology. It's kind of a hard genre to pin down exactly, just because I feel like there are a lot of books that are adjacent to sociology that I would want to group together. But nonetheless, that's what we're talking about. The first question is, what is your favorite book in each genre? So, we're going to start off with graphic novels and manga. Now, I realize that graphic novels and manga are more like a medium than really a genre, because you have tons of genre within each. But it's a category that a lot of people use, kind of all lumped together. So that's what I'm going to do. For each of these, I'm going to have several favorites because I'm bad at picking favorites. So, for graphic novels and manga, I have, of course, Heartstopper. It's a fan favorite because it is literally the cutest thing ever. It basically goes over the relationship between these 2 boys. A lot of other things happen, so there's like serious topics, serious conversation, stuff about coming out. Later on in the series, there's stuff about eating disorders and stuff like that. So there's a lot of seriousness, but there is so much fluff, and it's so well done. I adore it. The next one that I have is On a Sunbeam by Tillie Walden, which is a sci-fi fantasy story. I think that most people would probably say sci-fi because they are like in space, but the sci-fi elements are very whimsical to me, which makes it feel more like fantasy. But regardless, this is dual timelines. There's a lot about found family, and it is so just incredibly queer. I adored it, and I hope to reread it next year. Another favorite is Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me. This is another temporary like Heartstopper, but unlike Heartstopper, it is not a fluffy feel-good book about relationships. This actually focuses on a very toxic relationship, and it talks about how this affects all of the other relationships in her life. I have a lot of feelings about this book and a lot to say, so I'm not going to start on that because we'll be here for a while. But I really adore this book. It's very character forward. Really, a lot of the books that I enjoy are very character forward, but I've heard some people dislike this book because there isn't a ton of plot. I would argue that, there is some, but it's very character centered. And I loved it. Then the final favorite for this category, of course, I had to grab a manga. I have not read nearly as much manga as I would like. But I would say that my taste in manga is pretty similar to my taste for the rest of graphic novels. But I have Our Dreams at Dusk by Yuki Kamitani, and this series follows really mostly this boy who is gay and afraid to come out, but each book focuses on a different character, or a different person in his life. He stumbles upon an LGBT drop-in center. So each consecutive book focuses on another character that he meets there. And it talks about each of their struggles and different things like that. All of the characters are LGBT. It's just a really great time. Again, this is another thing that's really character-centered because that's what I like. So that is all for graphic novels and manga. Next, I have memoir. I've actually done a whole video recently on the top 8 memoirs that I've read, so if you like this, you'll probably like that. But I picked 4 that I really liked. I did 2 that I liked this year and then 2 from previous years. The 2 that I picked from this year were my top favorites from this year, and those were In the Dream House by Carmen Machado and When They Call You a Terrorist by Patrisse Khan-Cullors. In the Dream House is a lot more literary than a lot of other memoirs. This is mostly told in second person, It's very poetic in a lot of places, but it focuses on the author's experience being in an abusive queer relationship. It is just really excellent. And then When They Call You a Terrorist is a memoir about Patrisse Khan-Cullors, who was one of the founders of Black Lives Matter. And it talks about her childhood, kind of growing up in California in the age of stop and frisk, and how that impacted the men in her life and herself. And she talks about kind of the trajectory of her activism. This was an incredible book. It's an incredible story, and it's just written beautifully. And from previous years, first I have A Year Without a Name by Cyrus Grace Dunahm, which I believe I read last year in 2019. And this covers a period in Cyrus Dunham's life where they aren't really sure about parts of themselves. They're kind of like questioning and also like coming out and trying to figure out their name, but it goes so much further than that. It also talks about relationships with other people, romantic and otherwise. There's also a fair amount about their childhood, even though it is about this year, there are still flashbacks to their childhood and things like that. This is another one where I really love the way that it's written as well, so would highly recommend. Then the final one is an older favorite. I think I was reading it, I read it a few times around 2012 or so I'm not sure how much I could vouch for it, simply because it's been over 5 years since I last read it. So maybe take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. But one of my very first favorite memoirs was Tweek by Nic Shef. And in this memoir, he explores the period of his life where he was addicted to methamphetamines and heroin. And he talks a ton about his different relationships, how like the drugs impacted him. I remember liking the like way that it was written too, which I guess is a common thread with all of these memoirs. Most of these have some sort of like narrative element to them. And I remember particularly the descriptions towards the end of the book with like the ways that the drugs impacted him really stuck with me. Just because it's very, very vivid and very scary, honestly. And one of the things that I really liked about this book too is that his dad also wrote a memoir about the same period of time, so you kind of get both of their perspectives. His dad's book is Beautiful Boy by David Shef, which I think is more well known than Tweek, even though I personally liked Tweek better, but I could see that Beautiful Boy would probably be palatable for a larger audience. He also has a follow-up memoir about his subsequent alcoholism called We All Fall Down, which I liked, but I think could have used more editing. Anyways, I spent way too long on this. This was one of my first favorite memoirs. I'm not 100% how it stands up right now. I should probably reread it sometime soon. There you have it. Next, I have YA. And I think I might have said earlier that I'm focused on contemporary YA. I don't think that's actually really accurate. I'm mostly looking at, like, realistic fiction, because not all of it is necessarily contemporary. I think a fair amount of it is, like, contemporary for its time, but I know that one of them in particular is closer to historical fiction, even though it's not, like, that far in the past. It probably would have been set during the time that the author was a teenager. So keep that in mind. This is more like realistic fiction than contemporary. But I'll start with a newer favorite, and that is Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe. I've talked about this several times. It saw me and broke me, and it's just beautiful. I think the way that it's written is brilliant because you can see the characterization through the writing. I just have nothing but good things to say about this book. It talks about so many different things, even though the core of it is Ari figuring himself out and figuring out these feelings that he has and unpacking that. There's also a fair amount in here about grieving in different ways, not just like death and loss, but grieving as it pertains to, like, his brother who's in jail and, like, his idea of his brother. There's just so much in this, and it's freaking beautiful, and if you haven't read it already, what are you doing? There's a reason that everybody and their mom has read this, and there's a reason why it has 1,000 awards on the cover. Now, favorites that are a little bit older. Two Boys Kissing by David Levithan. I want to say I read it around 2015. This focuses on several different gay boys and is narrated by gay people of the past, so people who have passed on. In the book, it does refer to like the AIDS epidemic, so it's people who have passed on, partly due to the AIDS epidemic, but I don't think exclusively. But it goes through and sees these boys who are in very different phases of romance and very different phases of life, even though they're all teenagers. You have one that's recently gone through a breakup, one that's in a good relationship, someone that's like meeting somebody else, and then another person who's just very much depressed. So you get all of these stories. There's also trans rep in here, which is really nice. I remember just really, really liking this. And then we have some older favorites. So, a classic, possibly a cheesy choice, I don't know, nor do I care. Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky. I just really like this book. I don't think that I can say very much about it that hasn't already been said. It focuses on Charlie, who is new to high school. He recently lost his best friend to suicide, and he's kind of trying to fit in. The whole book is a series of letters to this person that he doesn't really know that well, but he thinks is someone comfortable to write to. And you get to see him finding friends, having problems with friends, coming to terms with himself. I related a ton to Charlie. In a similar way that I related to Ari from Ari and Dante, although obviously I have some slightly different characteristics. But I really loved this. I thought that the style was neat, and I really loved Charlie and want to protect him, but I also saw parts of myself in him, which those two things generally don't coincide with one another. But I just really adore this book. Then finally, I have my favorite social science related books. Now, with a lot of books that I've talked about already, I would say that I probably don't have a definitive favorite. And in fact, some of these categories, I just grabbed random favorites, such as with the graphic novels. But with this one, I actually do have one favorite, but I'll still be telling you about three. But the one that I think made a really big impact, and one that I think everyone should read, Black Feminist Thought by Patrisse Collins. And if you've been here for a while, you've heard me talk about this book, and I still think you should read it. It basically focuses on the idea that all of the history, the perspectives that we have, come from white men. That's the lens that we're given. And we need to basically reorient that lens and adjust, I guess, our understanding of what, is a legitimate voice. And throughout this book, she goes and she looks at the wisdom of black women from the past, and she does a lot of analysis and showing us how we can still see their experiences. And in seeing stuff from a black woman's perspective, we can see a lot about society that we wouldn't be able to see otherwise. She goes over just so many different things in here. She talks about controlling images, which is something that a lot of people talk about, I think, just in popular discourse. I know that certainly people talk about it when they're talking about movies, but it extends beyond movies. So a lot of people are familiar with stuff like the welfare queen trope, or other negative images of black women and other people, and a lot of that came from Patrisse Collins. And I think this is fairly accessible. Her intention was to make something that most people could read. There is a little bit to get through with the idea of epistemology, which seems like that's a big and weird word at first, but I think that the way that she breaks everything down is pretty accessible. So I'd highly recommend this. Another favorite is White by Law by Ian Honey Lopez, and this basically goes through the United States legal history and looks at how race has been legally constructed. So it looks at Supreme Court cases, it looks at policies, and how citizenship has been defined, and the different ways that it has been racialized, often in very explicit ways. I think that this idea is very important to grasp for people who are wanting to understand race relations in the United States more. This is not the only book that you should read on the topic, but I think that for me personally, this was really eye-opening. I read both of these for a class, just for full disclosure, I guess. Both of these are actually a part of my Race in the United States class, and several of the other books on my favorite shelf are too. And the final book, which I also read for a class, I'm honestly not really sure if I'm confident picking this book necessarily, because it was very much about the class, whereas the other ones, the books kind of stand by themselves. But with this one, this wasn't a book that I read from cover to cover because it is a textbook. However, I'm still going to talk about it. So, Feminist Methodologies for Critical Researchers. I think that learning about feminist methods in general was incredibly important to my work. For reference, I got my master's in sociology and I focused on the LGBT community. I interviewed people about how they used language to talk about their identities. So, for instance, someone who calls themselves gay or someone who calls themselves trans. But I was specifically looking at experiences of trans people who have used or do currently use non-traditional language. So basically anything outside of gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender. So I talked to some people who were asexual, I talked to a lot of non-binary people, etc. But I think when you're working with marginalized communities, and when you're doing qualitative research, and honestly, I think any research would benefit from a feminist lens. I'm not going to go any deeper than I already have because y'all are probably already bored trying to listen to all of this, but a lot of what I took from this and the ideas of feminist methodologies was just really important for what I do. So if you are in any sort of human research oriented positions, looking into feminist methodologies might be good. I'm not sure if this is the best textbook on it, but it is the one that we used for my class, and I got a lot out of it. So, those are my favorite books in each genre. That took about 100 years. Question 2 is, what are you currently reading, or what have you finished recently from each genre? For graphic novels and manga, I just finished last night the second volume of The Girl from the Other Side, which I really enjoyed. I'm excited to read volume 3. It's dark, but also wholesome. Like, the whole setting has a very creepy, supernatural vibe, but the characters themselves are super, super wholesome. For memoirs, the one that I read most recently was My Solo Exchange Diary Volume 2, which is the third in Nagata Kabi's manga memoir collection. So this was a graphic memoir told in manga, and it talks about her experience. Really, this volume focused on mental health and reconnecting with friends. And it also talks about the experience of actually putting out a memoir and having people perceive you in that kind of limited way. I really enjoyed the whole series so far. And I also have a memoir that I am in the middle of reading. And that is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And this is a memoir that's, it's technically in like nature writing, but so much of it is very much about the author's experience because it's her connecting her indigenous background, her indigenous beliefs with the science and everything else that she's learned as a botanist. It also talks about other things within her life. I know she talks about like being a mom and talks about her kids, and I've really enjoyed it so far. Next is YA, and the last YA book that I read was a novella, I'll Be Coming Home for Christmas by Mason Deaver, which is a follow-up to I Wish You All the Best, which is another one of my favorites. It focuses on the Christmas after they graduated, and Ben is trying to make it back home to Nathan with a surprise. It doesn't necessarily go as planned, but it's super cute. And then finally we have social sciences, and I think I'm going to mention two just because I'm not really sure about the categorization of one of them. These are both also definitely political science oriented books too. But one of them is Freedom is a Constant Struggle by Angela Davis. Angela Davis is a prolific writer and academic. The only reason that I guess I'm hesitant to put this in this category is because it's speeches rather than essays, for the most part. I feel like that's a silly line to draw, though. There's a ton of really great stuff in this. I would actually be really interested to see a lot of it, like, elaborated on and contextualized more. But I think that if I were to use this in a paper, I would pair it alongside other things that support, like, the facts that she talks about, if that makes sense. Whereas I don't think that's necessary with some of her other books. And then the other book that I know fits into this category because it is definitely an academic text, I think it was somebody's dissertation, but that is Moving Politics by Deborah Gould, which looks at the AIDS epidemic and the movement around the AIDS epidemic, and specifically looks at how emotion impacted that social movement. It took me 3 or 4 months to get through it, and I actually have a video where I break down a lot of stuff about this, as well as Susan Sontag's essays, Illnesses, Metaphor, and AIDS and its Metaphors, if you're interested in it, because if I start talking, I will not stop talking. Then the final question is, what book on your TBR from this genre do you think you'll read next? I'm very much a mood reader, so I'm basically going to list off books that I would like to read. Whether or not they'll actually be the next one that I read is to be seen. But for graphic novels, I have Bloom, which is a really sweet romance. I think one of them is a baker. It looks really adorable, and one of my friends just got done reading it and said that it was super sweet. And then a manga that I'll read pretty soon is Komi Can't Communicate, which I've seen recommended several times by Mariama from Black and Sapphic Reads. They have a lot of really good manga recs. I think we have kind of similar tastes in manga to a certain extent because I really love kind of more wholesome relationship-based manga. So this one looks like it's going to be good. For memoir, a couple that I would like to get to soon are Asana by Asada Shakur. This is an autobiography and not a memoir, but I would still kind of count it in the same category, especially since a lot of this does go back and forth between her past and a certain other moment in her life. It's all framed around when she was arrested for killing a police officer in the middle of a shooting in which she got shot, and she's actually currently still on the run from the U.S. government because of this setup. But it also goes back and forth between that and the early stages in her life. It is super impactful so far. I started this in December or January and then kind of set it down and just never ended up picking it back up. But this is one that I would really, really like to get to soon. And then the next one that I have is also not technically a memoir. It's a collection of diaries, but it's all in the same vein to me. And that is We Both Laughed in Pleasure, the selected diaries of Lou Sullivan, who was a gay trans activist. And he also had HIV, so that was another kind of piece of what he dealt with, and I think a piece of his activism. I'm not all that familiar with Lou Sullivan, hence why I'm wanting to read more about him. But I'm really excited to read this. This is on my LGBT history TBR, so hopefully next year I can get to some of these. But I've been super excited about this for a good minute. Then we have young adult books, and the two that I'd like to read soon are both kind of wintry. One is Let It Snow by John Green, Maureen Johnson, and Lauren Miracle. This was on my Bias Breaker TBR, and I clearly did not get to it because I'm talking about it right now. But this is actually the only John Green book that I've yet to read. I haven't mentioned John Green this far in the video, but he was probably my first favorite YA author who wasn't a TERF. And I really like a lot of things about like the way that he writes and a lot of his books. I know that he's like one of the people that's popular to dislike, but I really enjoy his writing. It's been a little while since I've read some John Green, so we'll see what this is like. I haven't read anything by either of the other authors, so it should be interesting. Then the other one that I would like to read is Annie on My Mind by Nancy Garden, which is a bit more of a backlist. But this is one of the kind of classic lesbian young adult books. Then finally, we have social science books that I would like to read. The first one of these is kind of a history book, and that ties in theology in different ways because it is a history of the church. But it is The Color of Compromise, The Truth About American Churches, Complicity, and Racism by Jemar Tisby. And this is another one where I feel kind of hesitant to include it in with, like, I'm talking about a lot of sociology books, and this is more like history, but you can't really separate the two. Sociology is about understanding the context that we live in, right? And we can't understand that without history. And this one is specifically about the church, but with the way the United States is, if you don't understand the church, there's a lot that you're going to miss. So, I'm actually in the middle of reading this, but I hope to get to it soon and finish it up. I do have two other ones that I would like to read, though. One is The Sociological Imagination by C. Wright Mills, which basically talks about the mindset of a sociologist and the way that you have to be able to conceptualize where you're at and understand the things that influence you in order to understand how they would influence other people. I'm paraphrasing here from, like, the first chapter, which is the main thing that I've read. I've read bits and pieces of this, but I would like to read it from cover to cover. Then the final book that I would like to read is Intersectionality as Critical Theory, which is technically on my currently reading shelf, but I have not touched it in a hot minute. I've already sung my praises in this video for Patricia Hill Collins. I am stoked to get to this one. This is basically about how the idea of intersectionality and how to utilize it has to be an active conversation between on-the-ground activists and academics. That's at least what I've got from it so far, so I'm super stoked for it. That's all that I have for the Omnivore Book Tag. I will probably tag a few people in the description so you can check it out and see if you're down there. If you're not and you'd like to be tagged, consider yourself tagged. In the comments, let me know what genres you read most of the time. Do you tend to read for multiple genres, or is there one thing that you kind of know that you like and you stick with that? Thank you all so much for watching. Bye. I know y'all didn't ask, and you don't see all of the crap that I cut out of these videos, but it takes me way longer to film these simply because of how I have my stuff organized. I think that most of my stuff comes out looking fairly organized, but the process looks like this. Just stacks of books, not even in a coherent way. I didn't even talk about this book or either of those. That's from my last video that I filmed. So yeah. So I'm sure none of you are wondering, but I am in fact a complete mess.